Yeah, so starting with the number one overall pick, and this just kind of will easily transition into our quarterback talk here. The number one overall pick in the draft. Before we get started here, if you're listening on the audio version, if you want to hit the pause button just for 2 seconds, scroll down, give us a 5-star review. That would really, really help us climb the podcast charts. And if you're watching us on the video side of things, head down below, hit that subscribe button, give us a like, and then let us know in the comment section anything that you feel that we either missed on or didn't get to, because we're going to have another pod next week as well before the draft comes around, and we will certainly address anything that you guys put in the comment section as well. So we'll go in after that. But number one overall pick, look, this was a market in which if I do content all over the place. Stephen, we had an early draft look podcast where I said, this steam on CJ Stroud is ludicrous. And I was screaming from a mountaintop to not let this affect your bets and don't go crazy on this thing. And sure enough, it has now swung pendulum back to Bryce Young to the tune of, listen, the best you're going to get right now is, minus 1,200 at 3 of the different books out there on the number one overall pick. Now, really the only way I think you bet this right now, Stephen, is if you have a nice, good Bryce Young ticket. If you just think that there is a snowball's chance in hell that this is all craziness and the Panthers could actually take CJ Stroud, it's already drifted up to 8-1 now, where putting whatever, $30, $50, whatever it is, to make sure that you can get a steak dinner out of this and you're not coming away empty handed if absolute chaos breaks out. But for me, it seems pretty obvious it's going to be Young. I was able to not only get in on Young a little bit earlier, but when the price swung all the way to plus 275 on Bryce Young, I'm also in on him as well right here. I think it is between those two guys. I think it's going to be Bryce Young. I thought it was going to be Bryce Young all along, but we're in this to make money, Stephen. This is the thing, right? This is one. If you can take anything away from this, what we think is going to happen, what Adam Schefter and all these other guys think is going to happen and stuff like that, that doesn't really matter. What matters is what the GM and the coach decide when they walk up to that podium and the name gets read off. And so there's nothing wrong with hedging in draft bets. Drafts get crazy. They make weird decisions sometimes. We have seen the Raiders, for example, make some of the worst, most egregious picks in the history of the NFL, over the last 10 years, over the last decade. So you just have to understand, it's okay to hedge a little bit to make sure that you don't walk away empty-handed. That being said, Bryce Young minus 1,200, CJ Stroud 8-1. The very next guy on the board is Anthony Richardson at 15-1. Rumors out there that the Panthers were doing their due diligence on him, but Stephen, it's not going to be him. It's going to be one of those top 2 guys, and it's very likely to be Young.
For sure, no intrigue left in the number one overall pick market, heavy juice. So what's interesting to me, Matt, though, is that so much of the airwaves have been sucked up over the past month or so about who the Panthers like more, CJ Stroud or Bryce Young, that there's been very little talk about how the other teams in the top 5, top 7 rank these quarterbacks. That's completely unknown at this point. There's obviously been rumors that the Houston Texans may not like CJ Stroud for whatever reason. Albert Breer is connecting Will Levis to the Indianapolis Colts, but what maybe they didn't anticipate CJ Stroud might be there for a chance to move up to 2 or 3, and if the Texans would even consider. So the fact that there's just been so much talk about who the Panthers like at quarterback and very little about who the other teams like at quarterback means that there's some pretty juicy odds out there on these other quarterback markets. And, let's start with just how many quarterbacks will go in the first round, Matt. Over under 4.5 quarterbacks, minus 115 each way here. Yeah. And that shifted a lot with the recent news in the last couple of days and weeks that Hendon Hooker might be moving up into the first round. Pete Schrager, who has been right about some things in the past, but completely whiffed on putting Malik Willis in the first round last year. So this to me, Matt, is a storyline that happens year in and year out. Some fringe quarterback is getting rumored to be taken in the first round, and then he doesn't. So I'm not buying it. There's also been a steady stream of information that Anthony Richardson might plummet, and if not him, teams don't like Will Levis as much. So I think it's a bit of a reach that 5 quarterbacks will go in the first round. And I like this kind of, standard minus 115 juice on under 4.5 quarterbacks in the first round.
Yeah, I'm kind of actually on the other side here.
Really? Okay.
I think a team's going to end up taking a flyer on Hendon Hooker. And here's the thing. I honestly believe now he wouldn't go number one overall, but had he not gotten hurt, I think he would at least be in the conversation right there with Young and Stroud. And so with all of that, I mean, the really the only knock now at this point is the age thing, because if we believe that he's going to have to sit for a year to be completely healthy, he's going to be a starter then in his year 26 season. And the thing is, yes, that's not great, but at the same time, if you get 8 to 10 years out of a quarterback, any NFL franchise will be perfectly fine with getting 8 to 10 years out of a quarterback. You get 8 years out of him, he's 34 years old. That's very commonplace in the NFL. I don't think that this is like the wackiest thing in the whole world that he would go. I think people are blowing this age thing up at least a little bit here, because we're talking about a guy that had just phenomenal success and has all the tools that everybody's looking at from an NFL standpoint. And the reason that I'm leaning a little bit towards the over is just because we do have some teams that have luxury picks in this draft. And that is where I think that some of this might actually come to fruition, right? Like Detroit has a pick at 18 and they will have already had a very high pick, and that's their second pick in the first round. If they wanted to take a Hendon Hooker, nobody's going to lose their mind over that for this Detroit team, because, by the way, if you look at the Detroit team on paper, they're pretty damn stacked on both sides of the ball. And so just admitting that Jared Goff isn't necessarily the franchise future here, I don't think anyone's losing their mind at all on that. You have Tampa at 19, certainly needs a quarterback. You have Seattle that has again, one of those luxury picks I'm talking about. Their second pick in the first round comes at pick 20, where they will have already had a top 5 pick and then can come back. And if they wanted to take a Hendon Hooker at pick 20, nobody's losing their mind. Pick 23, Minnesota. You don't have to play Hendon Hooker in year one because you still have Kirk Cousins on a 1 year deal. So he could be the bridge to get to Hendon Hooker. So I don't think that it is
Cousins.
I don't think that this is like the craziest thing in the world for one of these teams to kind of lock up a dude that, again, you get that 5th-year option and with a luxury pick, whatever. Now, it's probably got to be one of those teams. It's probably got to be Detroit at 18, Tampa at 19, Seattle at 20, or Minnesota at 23 for this to get home. But I don't think it's out of the realm of possibility for it to get there, which is why I wouldn't play the under. I'm not running to play the over either, but I would not be caught on the under here in this one, just based off of those teams that I do feel like kind of have some luxury picks.
Sure. The reason I brought it up is not because I'm betting it, but the fact that you're getting even juice on both sides. You don't see that very often at this point, a week before the draft as we record now. So I guess my point is, if you have a strong opinion like you do, then you're getting pretty decent juice here. You don't have to lay a lot. So it's kind of a 50-50 proposition here with the juice. I love that you brought up the Detroit Lions. The other team I want to bring up is the Las Vegas Raiders, who were already reported as very much in the mix, trying to move up to the number 1 pick here, despite the fact that they brought in Jimmy Garoppolo. So we know that they are interested in a quarterback in this draft. Those two teams are where you can get some really juicy odds in the market here to tie them to some of these other quarterbacks. To draft Will Levis, the Raiders are plus 800 at FanDuel. The Lions are 50-1. To draft Anthony Richardson, Indy plus 350. I don't think they're tied to Anthony Richardson. I think there's solid reporting from Albert Breer tying Will Levis to the Colts. But the other teams on FanDuel, Las Vegas, 4-1 odds to draft Anthony Richardson. Detroit, 20-1 odds to draft Anthony Richardson. Like you said, they have 2 picks if they wanted to do that. And if you don't want to get specific on which quarterback they'll draft, you can get the Lions plus 750 to take a quarterback, and you can get the Raiders plus 250 to take a quarterback over at DraftKings. So I agree with you. Those luxury picks, and the Raiders, I'll add as well, is already being tied to the quarterback market. That's where you can get some really interesting stuff. And I'm curious what you think about the Indianapolis Colts overall, because I'm convinced at this point that they are not going to trade up, either because the Texans are in their division and don't want to, or they know that the Cardinals are basically not taking a quarterback. They don't have really a big reason to trade up one spot. And lastly, despite the research they've done on these first-round quarterbacks, ESPN's Jeremy Fowler reported that the Colts not only flew out to BYU to give a private workout to Jaron Hall, but also had him in their facility for another workout. So they've worked him out twice now, kind of in the mold of that round 2 upside quarterback that Jalen Hurts was. And Shane Steichen, obviously coming over from Philadelphia, their OC, they went the second round quarterback upside route. So to me, it doesn't necessarily indicate that the Colts are going to pass on a quarterback in round 1. But if their guy isn't there, I don't think they're going to force it and take a quarterback. And it also makes me think they're less likely to give up more capital to trade up for a quarterback. So if that happens, then there are some amazing long shot odds on the Colts or the number 4 pick to be one of these elite corners, to be one of the defensive players. So that's interesting to me as well with the Colts situation.
Yeah, I can't see the Colts passing on a quarterback. I mean, it just doesn't make a ton of sense for them. I mean, I think they're just doing their due diligence in case something just went completely off the rails, and they should, that's what these teams should do. But I think they've made it pretty well known that they want a quarterback, that this is a draft in which they can take a quarterback. And honestly, you can't really go wrong if you're the Colts in this situation, if the Cardinals really do hold on to the 3rd pick, right? Because you knew going into this that you were likely to get either Levis or Richardson. And if this whole Texans thing
it might be
comes
Levis
into
or
play,
Stroud now,
you might have your choice of all 3. Yeah, you might have your choice of 3. So I can't imagine that that's going to be the case here when it comes down to it. So very interesting. I think the one thing we can look at here for me, if we're just looking strictly from a value aspect, it's plus 275 at DraftKings. I don't know exactly what it is at other books right now. Steven, you might for the number 2 overall pick. If there's a better odd on CJ Stroud to go plus 275 as the number 2 overall pick out there anywhere. But I think it's probably the best at DraftKings. Yeah, it looks like it is. It's plus 275. Here's the thing. We can either believe all of this noise out there, or we can just go with what is, again, like what was likely to happen for the vast majority of the entire offseason, which was that the Texans were going to take a quarterback at 2, whichever one that was left, whichever one of the guys that was left. And again, this could be a franchise altering decision for them if they choose not to, because Stephen, if they go into this year with Davis Mills at quarterback, you're basically having to tank again in order to get one of the top 2 quarterbacks next year. There's only 2 consistent first round quarterbacks next year. Now there are some guys that could sneak in, as we always know, but really it's Caleb Williams, it's Drake May. And then there's like some fringe guys that if they play up to, play up to the level that people think they could, then they could sneak into the first round as well. But you're really only looking at 2 guys that are surefire first rounders, which means you have to have one of the top 2 picks again next year if you want to guarantee yourself one of the quarterbacks next year. So, again, I just don't know if you can roll the dice. Listen, we all thought Seattle was going to suck this past year, and they didn't. They won more games than they needed to. The Texans, by the way, maybe the most egregious win in NFL history to put them at number 2 right here, where they could have taken Bryce Young at 1, and instead they decided to win in week 18, a meaningless game that put them at 2, and now that puts them in this weird position. So again, I am not off of this whole CJ Stroud going number 2 thing. I actually think that this is a lot of smoke going on out there, in my opinion.
Yeah, it's hard. This is where I'm not going to give a strong opinion here, because there has been a steady stream of information, not just from one person, but multiple, and some guys that have been trustworthy in the past, that the Texans may not be interested in a quarterback with that 2nd pick. Now, what I will also hedge with there is that the dumbest thing the Texans could do is not take a quarterback and keep the pick. If you're not taking a quarterback, there are teams that are confirmed interested in quarterbacks in this draft, and you need to trade that pick to move down 2, 3, 4 spots and still get a blue chip defensive player and extra draft capital. Your roster sucks. So, But dumb teams do dumb things in the draft. So, we'll see. The other thing I'll say that we should mention, and we'll talk more about this at defense, I'm not convinced that Will Anderson would be the pick at number 2 based on his odds, and that might be worth something too. But we can talk about that more when we get to defense.
Yeah, again, I just think we're doing this from a betting standpoint. I think the plus 275, just from a betting standpoint, do the Texans
because if it's not the Texans, it might be somebody that trades up to get him as well. You have multiple avenues to get Stroud at number 2.
Right. It's kind of one of those things where if it's not the Texans, if they wanted to trade out of that spot, it's likely someone coming up to get Stroud at 2. Yeah. So I do like Stroud at plus 275 to be the number 2 overall pick.